Hey, how's it going? It's Brooks with Character Design Forge, back with another weekend critique. I'm trying as much as I can to keep these critiques short and condensed and faster than usual, mainly out of respect for your time and to keep these sort of relevant and easy for you guys who aren't the intended recipients of the critique to get something out of them. This week, those two people are both Keyra and Bearshirt, and what's interesting about these two is that they're sort of starting on two different sides of the mountain, so to speak, sort of more stylized art and more realistic art, and working their way to the top of the mountain of artistic success, if you will. So there's a few things that are common between the two of them, even though they're starting from very separate places. So hopefully if you see any kind of problems or things to improve in your own art, these people's critiques will be helpful for you. One very self-indulgent thing for you, if it's possible, I have not had much time recently to do sort of one-off art, right? Especially things like fan art. I've been finishing up a lot of projects, doing a lot of work, and so aside from those projects and these videos, it's hard for me to get a little bit of art time to myself, if that makes sense. So Wednesday night this week, against my better judgment, I stayed up kind of all night straight working on the video that went up on Thursday, one that's called Super Nice Bros. It's where I have a collection of characters from Super Smash Brothers in very nice situations, being very nice to each other. And if you wouldn't mind going back and watching that video if you haven't seen it already, if it's of interest to you. And at the end there's a little bit of a surprise. There's another video much that's similar to it going up on Thursday, maybe the next in the installment if that gives away too much. Anyway, without further ado, here is this week's critiques. If you want to critique of your own, you can go to patreon.com/bageldenizen and select the Novice Bard tier. Hey there, Bearshirt. How's it going? Thanks for being a patron. Thanks for being willing to have a critique. So, I've assembled some of your work here, and something that you talked about in your submission is that consistency is difficult for you, and what you're really hoping for, right? You said that you're hoping for someone to look at your work and say, this is great, but if you did this like this, it would be so much better. You always feel like your work is one step away from good, and I can never see what that step is. I'm here to provide you with what I'm pretty confident is that next step for you. And what's really helpful is that you provided me with like kind of some of these, the sketch layer stuff, the construction, the planning phase. If it's a lot more helpful than stuff like this, which is, the finished art. And this is what I got from digging around other places on your site, not from what you submitted to me. So thank you for doing that. And this stuff is nice, especially, I like this piece, especially, and, these two are looking good. But here's the main thing that I'll nail a couple of different things for you, but the specific thing that I'm noticing is a lack of, especially in faces, but overall a lack of 3D, forms, right? And that's something that a lot of people have, especially sort of at around the skill level that you're at. So it's something that comes up a lot in critiques. But the main place that this is causing a problem for you is in faces. So what I'm noticing, and especially in these, is that your faces are either like this. They're a square, right? All of the features of the face are kind of arranged in a square like this. Sometimes they are like a little bit more like that, but each of the features is kind of reading at the same, we're seeing them at the same width that they would be looking straight on. It's just they're sort of moved around a little bit. And overall, it's not just this like that squareness, it's the flatness of it, right? Same here. And the thing is that, so it's either that, right? So a flatness of the face, and I know that this is sort of the art that you're making is mostly sort of this like culturally historical Greek type artwork. And I know that that's kind of a signature thing, is that like on all of the pottery and everything, the profile view of people and everything is sort of it's a piece of that, right? It's reminiscent of. But I'm noticing for you that it's kind of like a crutch. A lot of your characters, well, in the finished pieces, right? Looking at all of the finished pieces that you had, these included, looking at these just as a small representation of that, it's either faces completely in profile or faces completely straight on, right? In the cases of here and here. And so what that lends itself to being a little bit of a crutch, right? And very rarely do we see people in exactly profile view, right? We like to see a little bit of a 3/4 view, a little bit of perspective, a little bit of rotation, right? And so that limits you a little bit in what you're able to do. And going even further to something like bodies, here is a lot of there. I see the lines for construction, right? But the construction is only taking you to a point where you're constructing with 2D shapes, right? You're using circles instead of spheres and boxes instead of cubes, right? If that makes some sense. And so that leads to things being a little bit more disjointed. There's some anatomy work that I'd like to see you do a little bit more work with. This character, I wasn't sure if it was supposed to be male or female. Mainly what I'm seeing is you have a stylization of what is generally the case where male shoulders are wider than the pelvis just by a bit. Or I should be more accurate. The shoulder area is wider than the pelvis area. The skeleton is like minutely different there, but it usually comes down to muscle mass and fat distribution and things like that. So you have a character who is wider at the top than they are at that pelvic area, but then you're using very round shapes for the buttocks and stuff. And so that makes it a little bit more confusing. Especially when you're this stylized, if you're trying to make that very masculine, heroic male character, you're going to want to use more square shape language there. And the width of that pelvis, even though it's not as wide there, I saw a few other areas where you're kind of using the same methods that you're doing with this, this female character, where you're starting with that circle shape, where you really wouldn't do that as much with a male character. You almost would use kind of more of you can do it with either. But you might want to aim for more of a trapezoid shape. You are doing the right thing where you've got the legs on the side of the pelvis, right? Because we're not Lego people, right? Humans don't have legs that stick straight out down like that. So you're doing the right thing there, but it's a little bit, it's a little bit high there, a little bit extra defined, right? So realistic human studies will help you with things like that. Going back to the 3D shapes and everything, though, this is something I'm noticing too, where, okay, so you've got a character who is, like, this is maybe your best, hold on, iPad, come on, bear with me there. This pose here is maybe the one that's in the best shape for representing things in 3D, but you get down to that feet area, and we see 2 feet in profile view, which just isn't 3D anymore, right? It's all about keeping the illusion alive. So even if you had this one kind of doing that, right, that means that this one is, we're looking at in more of a perspective that way, right? With a little bit of an angle to the side, but the feet are going to be kind of apart. If you're looking top down, the feet would kind of be like this in a general pose, right? And a lot of times I see at the bottom of your drawings, even though these are kind of character sheet kind of things, right? You have this straight line that your feet cut off on. And I want you to think more along the lines of using a like perspective ground plane, right? So you take almost like you think about the Toy Story soldiers, the little boards that their feet are attached to. Think about that board, rotating it around, moving it in 3D space and everything. If your character was, standing like this, right, straight on like that, well, then how would that look in 3D? If the 2 feet are, maybe not straight on together, but kind of rotated apart, how does that look? What's the footprint of them? And then from there you can kind of build up and figure out, I think this should be more like that. But from here you can kind of build up and see like where the feet would land, and you can kind of see all angles of the foot this way, right? You're kind of looking at a 3D foot instead of one that's straight on, because that's not generally the way that we're looking at things. Even if your angle is a little bit more angled down, right, or angled up. Very rarely are you looking at a character straight on at the side like that. The same that you're very rarely looking straight on in a profile view. And even if you want to continue sort of stylistic choices like that, I would at least in your practice, aim to look at things from multiple angles, right? So build with more 3D shapes. Take just a little bit longer in your human anatomy building of your characters, right? And that'll get you that consistency. Realistic human studies are going to help you too. And just kind of keep moving toward those things. And also remembering also with the face, kind of going back to the face now. Sorry, I'm jumping around all over the place. The face, the human head is really a complex shape. But you'll find kind of an arrangement of the features like this, and that's about as angular as you're going to get. This is the shape that you're going to get between the mouth and eyes and everything. But remember that the facial features are wrapping almost like a cylinder around the front of the head. Remember if you're looking at a skull from the top like this, if this is your forehead here, everything is kind of wrapping like that, right? So when you have something like a nose coming in here, that's going to come in front of this eye. The eyes are going to be recessed a bit into sockets, right? And this eye is going to be skinnier than the one over here. If you're looking in a 3/4 view, again, sorry, it's easier for me to kind of start from scratch, right? But if the eye closest to us is shaped like that, then the one farthest from it is going to be a lot thinner like this, right? And all of that has to do with what things look like when they're wrapped around that sphere, wrapped around a cylindrical plane, right? So do, along with your realistic anatomy studies, realistic facial studies too, it always helps when you start with the realistic thing and boil it down to what makes sense for you, right? Going through the motions of sort of trying to replicate a realistic human face will help you figure out kind of a shorthand for yourself. Like, oh, that's how that's supposed to go. And when I'm drawing more simplified, I can kind of boil it down that way. Okay, so hopefully that's helpful for you. Hopefully that unlocks the thing that you're looking for. Again, draw more, right? If I were you, I would also kind of implore you to try drawing with a sketchier line or a lighter line, right? I know that this is digital, right? But if I'm very light with my line, I'll get something like this, and then I can refine that down. Otherwise, if I was pressing hard, it would look like that, right? And so that's what I'm seeing a lot with some of your pencils and everything. And so thank you for providing these. That helped a lot for me. And hopefully this was helpful for you. Please let me know if you have any questions. And hopefully applying that stuff, doing some studies along those lines will help you to get to that place. And hopefully I helped you unlock that thing. All right. Thank you so much for being a patron. Appreciate it. Have fun creating. Hey Keyra, how's it going? Thank you for being a patron and for being willing to have a critique done. This is a little bit of your work that I have assembled here. And as far as your submission for what you'd like to work on, you kind of didn't mention anything. You said no preference. The one thing that you did mention was that you feel like your art tends to lean to one side. That is definitely, I can identify with that. One thing that is helpful for that is to make sure that when you're drawing, you're in at least a consistent position, that you're at least sitting up straight as much as possible, and that your art is in front of you as straight as possible, not drawing at sort of an angle or whatever feels more comfortable. Typically, if you're doing digital work and the screen is tilted away from you, sort of so that the left side is closer to your face or your eyes than the right side, right? Or tilted just a little bit, sort of on the table, right? You can get a bit of a distorted view of your work, and so what appears to be flat to you is actually a little bit tilted or leaning like that. So beyond that, for things that I wanted to help you with is, because you said that animation is a goal of yours, from the work that I have put together here, it's really nice stuff. And what I like the most, especially about these pieces down here, is just the sort of the gestural flow of them. So you have a good eye for catching sort of the larger shapes, right? A lot of people tend to get caught up in sort of the tiny pieces but neglect maybe the overall flow of something. And so that's what gesture is, right? Capturing the motion and everything. So that's definitely apparent in something like this, right? Where you have the movement of the little girl, or you have just a lot of expression in the face, like the old man there. However, what I would like you to do, especially because you're looking to do animation, which typically means drawing the same thing over and over again. And I noticed too in your animation reel, something that happened a lot was from frame to frame, there's a lot of change between, one frame or one pose to the next, right? And it's inconsistent, right? In the from frame to frame, the drawings are changing. And so the reason for that is that when you're doing animated art especially, you're going to want to be more consistent. That's kind of the key to it. And one way to do that is by making sure that your forms and the shapes that your characters are made up of are consistent, they're constructed together, and maybe you start from a more inside out construction phase, right? And using construction is going to be part of that. So for example, something like this where, and again, this is kind of your face maybe leaning to one side, right? So let's get actually, let's just lower the opacity on this here. If we look at this face here, so we know that the face is kind of tilting down to the side that way, but the eyes are looking up that way. So we can kind of build that face, build the head. So that it's pointing down in that direction. And so on your original, the eye, let's see, so we're actually moving the head here. So don't look at the nose as a literal, oh, it's actually moved over this far, right? But the eye that's closer to us, this one here on your drawing, is just a little bit, it should be about there, right? If we stuck with the original pose. But if you kind of had used sort of some constructed, like a general guide to your faces, right? Then you can actually recreate the same face and head in a different orientation, rotated slightly. Right, I'm not going to recreate the same kind of distinctive features of each of these eyes, but basic layout of those features are going to be like that, right? And what's helpful there is that when you move down to something like, this face here, you're able to go, okay, well, I know sort of what my character looks like based on maybe like a model sheet. Maybe use of a model sheet is something that you can do going forward, just so that you can kind of measure up to and see, am I being consistent with my characters? Here, again, this eye here is in a good place, but this one over here, maybe you just want to mirror kind of so it's a little more symmetrically in line with the other one there, okay? When you get over to the face here with this older man, you see maybe a little bit more of a subtle thing, but let's bring the opacity back up. When you have this face here, a pretty symmetrical looking face, right? And the orientation of the features are kind of straight on. But then when you come up to here, those same features, like say this nose here, are pretty much the same, but just kind of shifted over to the side. See if we went in here and kind of took away the other things that are in sort of a 3/4 view, they would almost look like the character is still, we're looking at him face head on, right? So it might be helpful for you to just kind of practice kind of taking, okay, well, if this is our straightforward view, then we're going to come around here. The nose is actually going to hide part of the eye on that side. And this one here will still stay pretty much, it'll look pretty similar, although it's still wrapping around, right? So if we do something like that, and you kind of, again, through use of a character sheet, measure up and make sure that you've got what you want. Then you can kind of stay consistent. Make that eye a little bit smaller, right? You can stay consistent when you start moving the face around in 3D and everything, right? And you're animating. Again, here with this one, there's just a few places where, say like this, I think this pose here is one that just a little bit better understanding of anatomy would help. So for example, you've got, what I like to do is kind of create this line of action, right? So here you've got a leg that is, these shapes are really too flat to represent this character effectively in 3D. And there's just a little bit of understanding to be done there before you can do that. When you get to this knee here, this boot appears to be just a flat shape on top of sort of a flat leg and everything. And it kind of takes away from what is otherwise like a pretty good kind of flow of movement here. So just kind of recognizing, okay, I've got a boot that is, if we were looking at it from the side, we've got a cylinder like that. We've got another like sort of half cylinder or semicircular cylinder. And then maybe like the toe area is another like kind of half sphere, right? And knowing that means that you could draw it from any angle and then kind of maybe add some of those organic, more ergonomic, maybe the heel indentation and stuff, right? And from there you can know, well, if I'm looking at it from the front, I'm going to see my sphere, I'm going to know that there's foreshortening happening, and that'll be coming forward, and then otherwise I'll just see the cylinder there, right? And having enough of that information, and maybe once you get to your shading, you can just kind of, let's see, your light source is coming from this direction, so then your shade kind of goes, okay, well, here's the, you've got some shading happening here and here. Okay, and then the knee itself, foreshortening like that. So yeah, practice of foreshortening would probably be helpful for you, just understanding that, objects closer to the camera are going to be larger, closer to our eye are larger than ones that are farther away. And so that means that you might be looking at something with no perspective. This is something I did in another critique recently, where something that is oriented like this, that's the front of a cylinder, but with foreshortening, the cylinder looks like this, right? Where if we're looking at it from a 45-degree angle, this cylinder on its side, right? We're looking at it, it's oriented kind of like this instead of like this to our eye from the top. But here it is in the same position, except the foreshortening makes it look a lot bigger in the front and a lot smaller in the back. So something to think about for you going forward. There's a few other sort of anatomy pose kind of things that would be helpful for you as you kind of continue to practice human anatomy. But I think a lot of your the things that are sort of hangups for you going toward animation comes from maybe starting art from a more realistic or realism-based study and learning, which usually involves sort of more representational shapes and forms and light and everything. But sometimes that does tend to look a little bit flat when you start moving and rotating your character. So starting from a more animation-oriented, more constructed character method of drawing should be helpful for you going forward. And just draw a lot more. I think you're in a phase where the best thing to do is just draw a lot. Another thing, one more thing before I go that I noticed, not from the work that's here, but from some of your landscape stuff and maybe your Inktober and everything, is that a lot of your drawing was just way too especially the Inktober's were like this, right? Where you're zoomed way in and it's just like something like that, right? Where it's clear that you're kind of drawing, if this was an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper, you were using this much of it to draw, right? So I'd like to see you just draw bigger and draw more sort of uninhibited by small spaces. So just use a larger area to draw in, and maybe that should be helpful for you as well, because a lot of times when we draw too small, we lose too much detail, and that results in things like maybe the kind of muddling of that boot there and everything. Overall, I really like your work, and I'm looking forward to seeing where you go from here. Please let me know if you have any questions, and thank you again for your support and being a patron. All the best to you. Have fun creating.